love the science of what I'm doing, but I don't actually know how to deal with this. I don't know how to be relevant to these people in a way that would be meaningful and that would make a difference. And so that set me on a journey of trying to understand what is this thing that happens between people, but also people and animals, when we are presented with other people who are facing adversity or who are suffering. There's something that goes on. And what is it, and how can we actually deal with it in a way that it doesn't keep undermining it? So I have a little quote here, Helen Keller, and she says, although the world is full of suffering, it is also full of the alleviation of that suffering. And so what we have here are a whole lot of people who actually devote their time and devote their energy and devote their being to that alleviation of suffering. And to that, I want to really applaud you. A lot of the work, well, most of the work that I do is with people who are alleviating suffering in some way. And it's really the unsung heroes, those people that are prepared to put their own being out there in service to other people. So, yeah, we've seen some really, really graphic and quite disturbing images, which is part of the world that we live in, unfortunately. We also have you who are here and devoting your time and your energy to doing something about it. You know, perhaps we can just hope that somewhere there's some sort of balance that's happening. So there's really two perspectives that I work with in terms of compassion fatigue, and I'm interested to know, just really with a show of hands, there's the self as an individual and what you might be concerned about. And that might be you, or it might be people that you know or that you work with. And then there's the organizational context. So I'm interested to know, you know, there are things that one can do for oneself, and then there are also things that one can do within the organization to put things in place in order to help the people that are working for you. So just with a very quick show of hands, who would be more interested in an individual kind of look at compassion fatigue? Okay. And then there are those people who are managing or setting up or running organizations where you have people working for you, and you may be concerned about it in more of an organizational setting. Any of those? Okay, great. So basically, compassion fatigue is, it's been more of a research topic. So it's researched in organizations, and there's a lot of research as what one can do about it. It comes about in two primary ways, and also just to say there's lots of definitions. Okay, you start reading up on these things, there are probably as many opinions and definitions as there are people working with it. But I work particularly with some work, Charles Figley and Beth Hudnall-Stam, and they've worked a lot with what compassion fatigue is. And they identified two kind of groups of things that happen with people related to compassion fatigue. The one is more burnout, and the other one is what they would refer to as secondary traumatic stress. Why it's important to know is that burnout is more of an insidious, long-term, more slowly developing situation where people end up, well, it starts with kind of overachieving, over-asserting, overdoing, coming up with more and more difficult experiences, more stresses, and a gradual onset of fatigue, maybe becoming cynical or depersonalized, and then losing one's sense of the work that one's doing. But what does happen is you get what they call hitting the wall. And it happens, people, it really happens. People start to feel tired, they start to feel they can't cope anymore, and suddenly they can't get out of bed anymore. And then that is one person that was doing amazing work that is actually no longer available to do it. The second is what they refer to as secondary traumatic stress, and that is where you're exposed to stresses over and over again, and there may be an event which is particularly difficult to deal with, and there's a sudden kind of can't get it out of your mind and distraction by it. So there can be both, or it could be one or other of those two. And these are the things that we really need to look out for. I've done quite a lot of research in organizations. There's a questionnaire that we work with that tests these things. It's a self questionnaire. And what we see is people think it's burnout very often. We get called in because there's concern about burnout, but very often not. It's very often, the questionnaire shows that it's not specifically burnout, more likely secondary traumatic stress. But very often, also what we see is that it's not so much the work, the actual work that the people are doing that is causing the stress. Very often that gives a sense of satisfaction, what we would call compassion satisfaction. One's doing the work, one is feeling the results of it, and it's actually giving satisfaction. But very often within organizations, a lack of support is more the issue, or difficulties amongst co-workers. You find that when in organizations where people are doing the type of work that you're doing, you actually have less compassion amongst the people that are working together. And very often this is one of the things that's causing most of the difficulties. So just in relation to this, I want to speak a little bit about how do these difficulties come about. What is it? What is the process inside of you that is potentially leading to some of these difficulties, and what can you do about it? So first of all, I've actually chosen a person rather than an animal on purpose here, just to make it a little less provocative. What happens is that when you see, there's been a lot of research in neuroscience and just testing what happens amongst people when you observe stress or difficulties in other people. And they speak about vicarious emotional responding. So whenever we think about or see or hear about another stress, there's an automatic and unconscious bodily response of stress in ourselves. And they call it mirroring. So every time you see a picture that is disturbing, or every time you see an interaction that is disturbing, with a person or with an animal, there's a similar experience that's happening inside of your own body. And this helps us to be able to understand the other, I'm going to say being, just for want of a better word. So if you see this, you might find that there's some response in you. That response will vary from person to person. Some people might get an actual feeling. Some people might feel as though they're tripping. Some people might feel actually more towards the person in the picture. So there's a huge variation. So depending on your own context, so you're going to make meaning of the situation differently. And this is a lot about how we're then going to respond. So depending... Wait, is this the light here? Oh, there. Okay. So what happens is you get what they call emotional contagion. So you observe some being suffering, you experience something similar in yourself, and then depending on, this is kind of a representation of you as a sensing person, and then that's your awareness, depending on where your awareness goes. So you're going to make meaning of it in a particular kind of a way, and then you will respond either with what they call empathic concern, which leads into compassion and helping the other person, or you may experience personal distress, where you actually, the feeling that you've observed and what it brings up in you becomes almost overwhelming for yourself. Depending on the amount of personal distress and how it happens over and over again, so you're going to lead potentially into compassion fatigue or burnout, secondary traumatic stress. No, this is not. It's pro. Technology. So, okay. So basically, this is just another picture. There's a lot of words here. It's very technical. But just what I want to show to you is that there potentially are two areas where you can moderate what happens to you. So you see something, it's disturbing, it brings up feelings in you. There's a certain meaning associated with it. That meaning is very often or usually related to things that are going on in your own life at the moment. And they could be either past experiences, they could be your current context or situation. You know, how many difficult experiences are you seeing? How often? What is your load? Are your other relationships in your life supportive or not? So you're going to have a whole context into which this kind of vicarious experience, sharing of experience happens. And then there's going to be an automatic response. So you might find that, you know, a lot of people talk about being pulled to respond, not being able to say no, keeping going when you're exhausted or when you've had enough. Or so there's an automatic action that happens unless you actually put something else into place. So there are two potential entry points where you can start to notice what's actually going on for you and potentially do something about it. And the thing that I say to people is that, you know, when people do hit the wall, and we see it often, it's you need to exit, and very often it's forever. So you can't actually go back to the work. I was working with a specialist medical person in somewhere around Cape Town who had left a job, had been working for a certain amount of time, hit burnout, had to leave and couldn't actually go back to work, period. So they had to take like an administrative job somewhere. And it happens often. So really, if you can start to put things in place in your own life up front, possibly to take, you know, that holiday or that weekend off or go home early from work, it might mean that you exit from the very important work that you're doing for a short period, but it's going to enable you to carry on for longer. So when we speak about compassion, when we experience compassion and we act in a compassionate way, there's a noticing. We notice that something has happened, somebody is needing attention. We feel with that being, that person or that animal. We then make sense of it in some kind of a way. And if that sense making, if it's a compulsion and it's not thought through, it can potentially lead to more personal distress rather than the empathic concern. But if you can moderate it in some way that it is leading into empathic concern, it is more sustainable. It's coming from a different place of choice inside of yourself, and then it can avoid the compassion fatigue and the burnout from developing. So what can one do? And I think that's where really awareness, checking in with yourself, noticing when you are confronted with something that's really difficult, actually checking in regularly throughout the day. If you experience things that are really disturbing, finding what is it that you need? What do you need in this moment that is going to help you to process? It's about processing the difficult experiences, almost like digesting them, finding meaning about them, finding meaning for yourself in relation to them, so that you can then start to, keep going, finding the impetus. We speak about resilience. What is your resilience? What is your resilience point? How do you develop it? And actually putting those things in place up front before you reach that point way down the line when it actually is potentially too late. So self-care strategies. What is it that you need in this moment that is going to help you to move on into the next phase? And then in organizations, to actually look at putting things in place, organizational support related to potentially the organizational culture. Again, there are many things that, and this is where I think it is really important that organizations need to put in place something that is able to support the people to do this work. Because very often, imagine, you go home and you may not have people to speak to. You may be lucky that you have supportive family members who can listen to your difficult experiences, but very often they're difficult to share. Or people might be patient for a period and then they're not patient anymore. And then, who does one share with? Who does one actually debrief with? So that is where organizations can potentially play a role by creating the space to find what it is people, to notice, to reflect back, to create the structures that will help to support people. I've been working with a colleague, a Dutch woman. In Holland, they have a practice which they call intervision. And I actually when I heard about it the first time, I thought it was brilliant. It's not something that is common in English-speaking countries, but it's a processes that they introduce into organizations which are peer-to-peer, and they can be for learning and for support. So they don't particularly have supervision, but they have intervision, which is much more of a peer-to-peer creating processes within an organization to help work with each other. And we're developing together what we call empathic intervision, where you have empathy embedded into the intervision process, which when worked as a sort of an organizational process, you create structures in the organization that are looking out for each other. They're encouraging self-empathy. So self-empathy is about being aware of yourself, being aware of what's going on in your thoughts, in your feelings. When are those thoughts and feelings actually starting to go round and round in you, and kind of traumatizing in a sense, or reworking your feelings. Then also mirroring with each other. What we do is, I remember interviewing a manager of a trauma center, and she particularly spoke about how when she was supporting her staff, she would hear the stories and that would reintroduce. So there's almost like a cycling of the difficulties, the pains, whatever it might be, through sharing, and if there isn't the right structure in place to actually deal with it adequately, you can find that it keeps circulating the difficult experiences. So this is through mirroring, but one can also find ways of connecting through the mirroring, through body language, supportive types of body languages, and things like that. Then also hearing others. You find very often that experiences are different for each person, and we very often hear something and then assume that we've heard something else out of our own experience, and then throw that back at the person that we're listening to, and then perhaps aren't relevant to that person because we're not actually hearing them from their own experience. We're hearing what we think we want to hear from our own experience. And that's where it takes it into perspective taking. And that is about really acknowledging different people's experiences, recognizing where people are coming from. We all come from different life experiences, different ethical perspectives. We might not always agree with each other. How can we actually understand somebody else's perspective from their perspective. So these are some of the practices that one can actually integrate into organizational settings where you can start to help to support each other through doing the difficult work that you're doing and creating a more of a sustainable environment. So I'm not sure how we're doing for time, but I think... Can I invite questions for 5 minutes? And if there are any questions, how should we do this? No questions.
Thank you so much. Let me give you a little something.
Thank you.
There you go. Thank you, thank you. Really appreciate it. Guys, I think it's one of the hardest things to admit to is when you actually have something emotional affecting you and to deal with other people. But it is important for us to talk to other people. As the doctors pointed out, you need to have that offload, that download ability. If you just keep it to yourself, you will burn out. And I'm sure some of you already know that and are already feeling that, or know someone in your organization who is. So it's definitely a good idea to take it to heart and pay attention to this. It's an important factor. So we're just before lunch. We've got a little bit of time. I think I'm going to call up Jules. No, not yet. No, not ready. You haven't done anything? Okay, so I'll remind people. Cashback. All right. We'll get the lovely young lady up the top.
Now, I'll be around later because I hope to choose 3 people to get a My World voucher to help you start your shopping process with Cashback World. And Cashback World, you might have seen me in the corner when you first come in, it's the largest loyalty program in the world. It's in 49 countries. It's very well established now. It is newer in South Africa, but we're working on that. And what we want to do here is have a shopping community. So whenever you go to Checkers and Uber and Spur and Toys R Us, there are various places, and you go there and you shop using our cashback vouchers, which you order online and then come to your phone. You can get them put on gift cards. I've got the gift cards out there to show you, you know, Toys R Us and so on. And you just, at that point, it's just a quick swipe and you're buying the stuff as you would normally in Checkers. And you will get 1% of your shopping and cashback. Now, I know that doesn't sound very much, but there's a lot of people in this room. And I bet if you used to do 1,000 rand shop in a month, which is quite, you know, over a month, quite easily done in Checkers, that's 10 rand. So that's 10, 20, 30, 40, 50. That's a lot of people, isn't it? And that's just this month. And then the next month. So what we want to do is have this shopping community, and then eventually the money will be rolling back to RRSA. Now, that might not happen in 2 months. It might not happen in 1 year. But it will happen because everybody shops. And then you're going to tell your sister, and you're going to tell your mum and your grandma and your husband, and we're going to get them shopping. And my job is to help you go shopping, all right? It's not rocket science. It's a little bit fiddly in the first place, but we love that shopping community. So come and see me, join up. Costs you nothing, and you get money back. And you could even get a 100 rand voucher to start your shopping off. If you've got a company, also pop your card in the bowl, and I'll have another conversation with you a different time. Thank you, and I'll see you after the coffee break when we do the draw. Thank you for that opportunity.
All right. Thanks, Jules. All right, so we are going to break for lunch. I must just advise, if there is anybody with a peanut allergy, just remind the